Going from
That's nuts, dude.
I know, I know.
I just noticed Marty.
Yeah, always up there.
Look at him freaking asserting his dominance over there, dude. Yeah. He scratches little. Yeah.
Is that the little
I'm sure he
like that?
appreciates that.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
Welcome, everybody, to the newest episode of LetterBros, where we let a wheel decide our fate and what movie we will watch next, based off the top 100 movies on Letterboxd. As always, I'm Felix, and that's Parker. How we doing today, buddy?
Oh, hey, Felix. I am, doing good. Can't complain. Got a nice hot coffee here, and we
That
had
you
a
almost spilled.
yes. Do I need to say it again? That it was almost Spielman.
Why'd you have to say it like that? It could have just you could have just said it almost spilled, man.
Yeah, but as insinuated by my coffee, we are discussing. I can't pronounce his first name. Władysław Spielman.
Vladek.
And his story from World War II in the 2002 film The Pianist, which, dude, it's so we had an English language film, but it's very much like I wish it was in Polish the whole time. It's one of those movies.
Sorry,
You
for
froze
some
there.
reason my camera froze.
Yeah, I was like, dude, are you okay? Are you smelling toast?
Am I smelling toast? Get the fuck out of here.
But yeah, the Pianist is currently ranked as the number 69 nice movie on the Letterboxd Top 100. I don't remember what it was. It was 70 something when we pulled it or when we
it's like
created the list.
74 or something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I am excited to get into this and talk about it with you. I've seen your review go up on Letterboxd. I haven't put mine up yet, so I'm going to put it up right after this episode. I know, crazy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, should I dive into the plot here and we can get into our discussion a little bit?
Yeah, give us the rundown.
Definitely. So we are today discussing the 2002 film The Pianist, which is directed by Roman Polanski, starring a 29-year-old Adrian Brody, who now is getting, of course, a lot of recognition for The Brutalist. And Brody did win Best Actor. He became the youngest Best Actor winner ever with this performance at 29. But the movie itself is a biographical war drama that's based on the true story of Władysław Spielman, who is a Polish-Jewish pianist who survived the Holocaust in Warsaw during World War II. The film chronicles his struggle to stay alive as he witnesses the destruction of his family, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and the devastation of his city. And through luck, resilience, and the help of quite a few allies, some of which are very unexpected, Spielman endures the war and eventually regains his career as a musician. I'll just go ahead and spoil it outright. We do have a great credit scene. I watched the entire credits. I don't know if you did as well, but
I did. That shit was awesome.
yeah, it was great. So yeah, I mean, it's a devastating true story, but one that was put beautifully onto the screen. It's definitely a tough movie to watch. But I wouldn't say I personally. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to say this wasn't like as heavy-handed with the depression as some of the other ones that we've seen, but it really is, especially up front. There's a lot of violence in this movie, and there's a lot of stuff that's just hard to watch and stomach, knowing that that was the reality of our world at one point, and an emphasis on the time in which Spielman gets separated from his family, and we just straight up never see them again. And it's obvious what happens and where they went at that point. But I'm curious, what are your overall thoughts on this film, Felix? I'm not going to give away your score just yet, just in case people listening haven't seen it on Letterboxd. But what were your takeaways? How are you feeling now, having sat on it for a little while?
So I will agree with Parker in that this movie was tough to watch. And I mean, I watch a lot of like regularly tough movies, but in the sense of like violence, like I think of like Terrifier 3, which is like a really weird comparison for this movie.
Right.
But like something in terms of like that graphic nature where it's like it's so graphic, it's almost comedic.
And
But in
it's not
terms
reality. It's not real.
Correct. Whereas this, it's like you have to sit with the fact of knowing that this actually happened in someone's life. And I would think that, Roman Polanski, being the, prolific filmmaker that he is, took the time to like actually ask Wladek, or well, no, he couldn't ask Wladek. He was dead in 2000. This came out 2002. But at least getting like, the historical
He
accuracy
wrote an
of
autobiography, though.
exactly. And just trying to get all those little details. Like the image that comes to my mind that has been burned in there is when they turn off all the lights in their apartment and the Nazis come and pretty much like take over a building in their neighborhood, and they interrupt somebody's dinner and ask everyone to stand up, and there's an old man bound to a wheelchair who physically cannot stand up. So in retaliation, they take this old man, they pick him up from the wheelchair and push him over a balcony. It's again, there was much worse stuff that happened before
I
that, but
mean,
that's just the image
I,
that strikes me as like this shit was actually happening back in
yeah.
Warsaw in the 1940s. Like it's tough. It's definitely tough to watch.
I think what you're saying about that scene in which the elderly gentleman is thrown over his balcony, and then right after that too, the family is forced to just run down the street and get shot, basically, for fun. And I think that really is a turning point where we start to see, okay, it starts. This film does a very good job of progressing us through the duration of the war. In my opinion,
Mhm.
it's paced very well, and you are learning of things as they happen, including, even all the way up from England and France declaring war on Germany, and then all the way through the Germany and the Russian front, and then the Soviets coming into Poland and reclaiming Warsaw. And so it does a very good job of letting you know where you are. And that scene where we see that family massacred is really, I think, where it starts picking up the, oh, okay, this is no longer just racism and gentrification and, or not gentrification, but like pooling, ethnic cleansing,
Just
like in a sense,
anti-Semitism.
and relocation. But it moves from really despicable treatment into just outright unpunished violence at will. And
Mhm.
I think that Polanski does do a very good job of progressing it into that and building up the fear so that we as the audience feel that building tension that the Spielmans are feeling as they're seeing all of this completely unfold around them and everything, their entire life just crumbling in front of their eyes. It's heartbreaking, and it's
Mhm.
told in a very heartbreaking way, but it's also told in a very effective way, obviously, and in a way that really sticks to the brain, especially because it's a true story. I mean, it's tough.
That's the thing that really like just kind of locked it in for me, cuz like I will say, and I mean Parker and I kind of discussed this, that this might be a movie that Parker ranks higher than I do. Mainly because while Parker said he thought that the movie was paced very well, and it's tough because this is a movie based on somebody's real life.
Hmm.
And like you have to go into it with that mentality that like this is a, I wouldn't say beat by beat telling of Waddick's life, but there was just a point in the movie, and I think it's like after the big turning point of the movie when his family gets put on a train and you never see them again, which is heartbreaking because up until that point, like you are there locked in with this family and just watching their struggles as like literally beginning of the movie, like yes, they're still dealing with the Nazis occupying Warsaw, but they are still pretty much like living their life to the most that they can, and then starting to see the decline as they start putting on the armbands. They start funneling all of the Jews into a ghetto, and that gets smaller and smaller, and then eventually just gets closed down. And obviously like that climax of Vladek getting pulled out of the line and essentially saying like, I've saved your life, like go, like get out of here. And to where that's where I'm like, all right, I'm locked in. But now it pretty much is like Vladek occupies a space, gets kicked out of a space, occupies another space, gets kicked out of another space. And I feel like that's where the movie, like that point at least, was the kind of drawback for me, was kind of like,
Hmm.
okay, like it's getting a little bit repetitive, but you also have to think about it as this is somebody's real life. It's just him trying to survive.
Yeah, I definitely see what you mean in terms of once he is separated from his family. And in real life, Spielman spent, I think, 2 years after that navigating war torn Warsaw. And I can agree with you. I think it's interesting the characters that we get to see and how they help him. There's, of course, the couple that helps him, and he kind of seemed to have had an attraction towards that. I forget the woman's name who helps him and ends up being married after he escapes the ghetto.
I think she's a musician too.
Hmm.
And then her husband's an actor. They mention it a lot. She's like, their
Yes. So
husband is an actor.
I can agree with you there, and I think that there is a little bit of a limit in terms of the development of those characters, and obviously we're being told the story of Spielman and his development and what he has to navigate in order to just survive. But there's so many interesting stories that could be told from this period of time because it's such we talk about the human condition often on this, especially after having watched the human condition, which we didn't think best represented the human condition. However, circumstances such as the one that this film is living in really brings out like the raw human condition of people. And we see that both on the Nazi side, where these people just become absolute animals because there's no repercussions for them killing and murdering and pulling people off and beating them senseless. And then on the flip side, we see the people who are being persecuted, what they're willing to do to survive and what they're not willing to do to survive in order to protect what it is that they believe in and their principles. And we see that at play throughout the film, especially with Spielman's family and what they're willing to do and not to do and what they eventually succumb to just in order to save themselves from being murdered, which ultimately was, I hate to say it, but was in vain. So it's tough. I think there's a lot of really interesting stories that could be told from the perspective of the surrounding cast as well, because everyone has a unique story. And I think that's what's special about this movie is that we get to see just the individual story of one of the millions of people who went through this and what it was like for him specifically. And
Mhm.
I think that it provided a lot of very interesting insight. I think it was pretty informative film to some degree in terms of the way in which it was told. And I really like the perspective, some of the POV shots that we get. I'm starting to learn that my favorite war movies are the ones that are told from the home front as opposed to from the front lines, because there's
Yeah.
really interesting stories to be told about the people who are suffering the collateral damage of the war that's occurring. That's why I loved Civil War last year too. But
Yeah.
we get some really good shots of Spielman looking out his windows and the building across from him being raided during the beginning of the Warsaw Uprising, and just seeing it from 30 feet
Just
away.
sorry for like to interruption. You're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
like the Jewish uprising
Mhm.
that they start shooting down at the German soldiers outside his window, right?
Yes, and the guy walks out onto the balcony with an RPG and just shoots it into the building, and then they
Yeah.
roll up with
Oh
the
yeah, with
tank.
like the big cannon.
Yeah, so I mean that's where I did think that the latter half of the movie was still being told at a good pace, because there were these crazy things happening where Spielman has a tank shooting at his building and his door is locked from the outside. He has to literally crawl into another apartment through a hole that was blasted by the tank. I mean, it's just insane shit. It's insane
Yeah.
shit.
I think like it's that was where I was like that was the lull for me in the movie, like when he
Hmm.
first starts like having to go from like built like from residence to residence, but like after he seems to be comfortable like in the two kind of residences that he occupies, but then like when he starts growing out his long hair and his big long beard and he kind of is just like he's looking decrepit is where the movie kind of picks back up again. And I feel like I'm jumping way ahead, but when he's like scrapping for food and we get to like that scene where he finds like a can of cucumbers.
I mean, that's the best. I think that was the best part of the movie, and I wish we got more of the relationship. Sorry, not to interrupt again, but
No, I honestly I agree because very interesting and was
That could have
also
been an
kind of
hour and a
jarring
half of
for me
movie.
as to
Yeah.
like, we'll kind of discuss it that like it's towards the end of the movie, like Vodek is decrepit at this point. He's scrapping for any piece of food he can find, and he finds a can of cucumbers that he's trying to open up, and it essentially falls to the ground, and it's just such a good shot where the can rolls over to a pair of black leather boots as the camera pans up, and it's a Nazi like war general essentially. And you're thinking like, I literally gasped when the boots came on screen. I'm like, okay, he's fucked, but I know he lives because obviously like he lives to the year 2000. I'm like, how is he getting out of this situation? The German officer pretty much is just talking to him, just like, what do you do? I'm a musician. Okay, play for me. And Vodek essentially is playing for his life in this scene because he's like, that's another thing I'll say about this movie. The music is incredible when we get it. Like, I don't think
When
there's
we get
really
it, yeah.
necessarily a score unless Vodek is playing. And like that's pretty much like the majority of the music we get in the movie. And it's astounding, especially in this scene. Like he's going ape shit on the piano. Because he's playing for his fucking life.
Well, I have to disagree with you there. I think
Really?
yeah, I don't think he really in that moment is playing for his life, and obviously neither of us can speak for him or for this situation, but I think in that moment, and this may be a complete overstep, but I remember watching it and thinking, what a beautiful ending in a way. Say that the officer were to be cruel and were to kill him while he was playing the piano. In that moment, Waldeck was doing the thing he loved most that he was not able to do for literal years because he had to live in an apartment with a piano and be quiet the entire time.
Yeah,
And just
that
that
sucks.
internal agony. So I think for him to be able to sit down with his gnarled hands and play at the request of someone, even if it is a Nazi officer, was a nice moment for him. And maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe he was playing for his life, but I want to note that the German officer, his name was Wilm Hosenfeld, and he saved multiple people that were under persecution during World War II and helped to keep multiple people, including Spielman, from being murdered by the Nazis.
I
So
didn't know that.
I
That's
would like to
that's
think,
crazy.
I would like to think that even if Spielman did not put on the performance of a lifetime in front of him, that maybe he still would have been spared. And I think that there's a really interesting story to be told from the perspective of Wilm Hosenfeld, who he did die, as the movie tells us, in 1952 in a Soviet prisoner of war camp, which not to, of course, no sympathy for the Nazis whatsoever. We saw secondhand through this movie the brutality that they enforced upon innocent people. But there's a very interesting and potentially sympathetic story to be told from Hosenfeld's perspective, who did disagree with Nazi policy and with their propaganda, and did what he could to save people. So it's interesting
And
as
it's
well. And I
such
wish,
a and sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
like
yeah.
coming from such a high ranking officer of the SS too. Is I mean, after that scene, you see him enter like a Nazi office and everyone stands up when this guy enters the room.
Mhm.
So I think you could align it with he didn't agree with the tactics of the Nazis or the belief system. But I also think it's towards the end of the war. He knows that the Nazis are on the losing front. So I
Yes, yeah,
think he's building up restitution and being like, we're
possibly.
we're at the losing end of this war. Because you even see it when the Soviets encamp all of the Nazis into like that pen, and he
He
hears
uses
the
it.
name Spielman and he pretty much like screams out like, I helped Spielman, tell him it's me, and he'll know and he'll get me out of this. Like you see that desperation of him trying to like kind of boast on the fact that he helped the Jews out while the Nazis were on the losing front of this war. So,
Mhm.
and I mean, again, that's another thing where like you don't really know because you don't have the opportunity to ask him. But I think it's kind of a balance of both, where he's kind of just like having restitution, like with his maker or with, trying to help his case out, because he knows like all of the Germans at this point are going to get dicked. Like every Nazi officer is going to have a giant target on their back, and he doesn't want that. But I agree with you. I would love to see, and again, just I'm not siding with Nazis, but
Right.
it would be such an interesting story to tell from his perspective as well. Because I mean, I even have it on my notes here. Like, you watch a lot of like World War II movies that like the Nazis are like almost a like cartoonishly bad guys. Like they're made out to be such a villain that like you see whoever's opposing the Nazis. Like I think of Inglorious Bastards, but this was just so rooted in just real hatred and real just belief in what your leader is telling you about this specific group of people. And it was uncomfortable to watch. And obviously, like, we still have Schindler's List on this list, like, but I think this was probably the most graphic and real and just cruel depiction of Nazis I've at least seen in a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing close I would say would be American History X, which is not German Nazis, that's American neo
Yeah, it's like
Nazis.
neo Nazis, and
Right.
it's like the 1990s, which that's another
Which
movie I
that's
cannot
a
watch
movie that should be
again.
on this list. Should be on this list, in my
It
opinion.
should be, but I'm glad it's not, because again, I do not want to watch that movie again.
You have seen it? Okay.
I have. I watched it in high school, actually.
Yeah,
So
same.
we all got to collectively get together and watch someone get curb stomped in a classroom.
Oh, you watched it in your actual
Yeah, dude, it
high
was
school.
like for class.
Oh
No,
my
dude, like
gosh.
literally in my English class, my teacher's like, "Yeah, let's all just watch American History X," and I guess she forgot about that scene, which I'm like, "How do you forget?" And we just all collectively just watched a dude get. Yeah, I can't do that movie again, dude. That's like, it's amazing, it's great rewatchability. That would be a 5. Like, it would be like in the moment, it was crazy to watch, but I'm not rewatching that shit again. Plus, the dad from Boy Meets World is in it. I was like, you see Boy Meets World, and you're like, oh, he's such a great dad. And then you watch him in American History X, and you're like, what the fuck is going on, Mr. Matthews? But I mean, that's another thing.
Yeah.
But I
Another
feel,
conversation for another time.
I feel that it would be best to just kind of dive into the rankings. I feel
I
like,
agree. I was about to ask if that's what you wanted to do.
let's do it, baby. All right. So for
Tough movie to rank again.
yeah,
It's similar to Passion of Joan of Arc in a way. It's like, okay, well, even more so in this case because it's always hard to rank true stories, especially those of this magnitude. It's a
and
very
that's
difficult
where
thing
I
to do.
found it really tough to rank it, honestly.
Mhm.
Like, this was, again, it's, you either have to rank this like as a film, like your enjoyment of the film, but it's tough when it's based on a true story, and you're like, how can you hate on the accounts of someone's actual life?
Right.
So starting off with enjoyability and rewatchability, I gave this movie a 10 out of 15.
That's higher than I would have expected from you based off what you said.
And that's low for me, honestly. Like, it's anything past like an 8 or something, you could tell I fucking hated it. But no, I mean, like, this movie obviously is legendary for a reason. It received a lot of accolades, like best picture and best actor, obviously. Like, and it's always really fun to see a baby Adrian Brody, but we'll get into that in acting. But
He looks the same now.
no, dude, he looked like, anyway. Again, I give this movie props for telling the story it does and telling it in such a bold and beautiful way. It's just not a movie that I'm going to be returning to anytime soon.
Yeah, I gave it an 11. I think I'm more apt to return to it than you probably will be because I think it did have a good flow to it and it did a very good job of keeping my attention the whole time. That's for damn sure because I really didn't know other than Spielman, like we know he survives. Other than that, I didn't know which characters that I care about, i.e., his family, or what fate they're going to meet. And unfortunately, it's a true story, so we have to deal with the true circumstances. But it certainly kept my attention the whole time. I obviously cared deeply about what was going on. You're right in the sense that it's definitely not a popcorn movie. You know, it's not one that you're gonna flick on for a good time at home and drink some wine and pass out. You know, like that kind of thing.
No,
So
true.
yeah, However, the story it's telling is a very human one and is told from a very human perspective. And the supporting characters are all very human. I mean, even down to the guy that used to work at Warsaw Radio that Spielman passed every day. And then he's out here raising all this money to raise food for Spielman and is just pocketing it. And it's just these little things in the way that people act when in crisis that is interesting to watch play out on the screen. I think I'm going to stick with my guns and give this a 14 out of 15.
Nice. Well, for me, this was obviously it's a true story. It's a story told from Spielman himself, but I feel like in terms of like the actual film telling of the story, I gave this an 11. Mainly because I feel like it does get a little bit repetitive with like jumping from one place to another, but it's again, it's tough to kind of rank that when it's based on someone's real life. That's just kind of like where the story for me, I kind of like checked out. But then when we get back to like he's literally like scrapping for food to like survive, like he's in survival mode, that's where I kind of pick back into the movie. And again, it's told in such a brilliant way where I was hooked for pretty much the entire film. Once they get like they ship his family into the trains, and now I'm like, what the hell is he gonna do next? That's where I was just completely locked into the movie, which bleeds into lasting impression, where I gave this a 12. I mean, this movie is profound and has continued to stand the test of time, even with like, the things going on with Roman Polanski. But this is a film, much like his other films, like Chinatown and Rosemary's Baby, that just stand the test of time. That like you see a movie like this and you don't really get a lot of that now. Like it's just this raw storytelling and this raw emotion about someone's real life.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the lasting impression, I think I have it at a 13 here. But it's one that definitely is going to stick with me. And obviously, I was not alive during World War II. I've heard stories from my Nona, who lived in Vasto, Italy, though, of Benito Mussolini marching through the streets while she's literally hiding so that her family is not taken and put in a mass home, essentially, for people who are not actively assisting Mussolini's goals. And so, having heard those stories from when I was a kid and seeing something similar, obviously not the same, different region, pretty different circumstances in some aspects, but it still sticks with me. And again, I really appreciate the fact that this is a film focusing on one person's life during a major event that involved the lives of millions of people. Because oftentimes when we get these movies about large scale events, we're following obviously a protagonist, but we're following more of the story at large rather than the individual's personal experience set against the backdrop of what is going on circumstantially. So I think it's going to stick with me, and I'll probably revisit it at some point too. But I'm glad I watched it. For visual and auditory appeal, this is kind of where I'm stepping down a little bit. I put this at a 7 out of 10. Obviously, the music is good, but it's not like it's an original score really, or not a super notable original score. A lot of the music I think that we're getting is Chopin, which is great. And Brody, of course, learned how to play the piano, though I don't think he's playing everything that we're hearing.
No.
Yeah. And I also think, and this could drag down suspension of disbelief or visual and auditory appeal, I think that a lot of our locations looked like sets. And that's where I think I have my biggest gripe with the movie is it looked like we were on a movie set for quite a few scenes, in my opinion. I also didn't love the editing of the film. Like, while I think it was well paced, I didn't think that there was anything spectacular going on from a camera work perspective. I mean, it was very good. I think highlights are what we're watching from Spielman's point of view out of windows or from afar. I think the cinematography really shines there and kind of showing us a third party perspective of something else that's going on. But I think the editing was a little wishy-washy with some of the fade outs that we get to end some scenes. Then we would just jump into like a new day. I didn't love it. So I think a 7. It was like really good, but nothing crazy.
No, I agree with you there. I gave it an 8. While again, I think that this movie was shot very well. There were some scenes, especially some of the exteriors where like some of the buildings are on fire, that looked really fucking fake.
Hmm.
Like it looked like CGI fire at some points. But again, that was just like a couple scenes here and there. I mean, otherwise, like the rest of the movie looks and sounds really good, is where I'll agree with you there. For pacing, that's where it kind of takes a little bit of a dive for me, is where I give it a 7. I mean, I mentioned it earlier that there is a point in the movie where I feel like it does get really repetitive, but it's tough. But I mean, with my personal like viewing of the movie, the middle, like after he's like jumping around from apartment to apartment, is where it does kind of take me aback. But then after that, it does pick back up for me. So it's not like I'm going to go and give it a 5, but 7 is where I sit at it comfortably.
Yeah, I gave it a 9. I thought that it moved along very well. And it's hard to tell a story in 2 hours and however many minutes that took place over multiple years. You really have to pick and choose. And I think for the most part, they did a really excellent job of moving it along. I was engrossed the entire time. And I mean, these are I'm sure that some liberties have to be taken in order to make a feature film, of course, out of someone's entire, life experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it hit all the right beats. I mean, it was there the entire time, and I never felt bored with it. I had to force myself to go to sleep, actually, because I was watching this late at night, and it was rolling around 2:30, and I had another hour left. And I knew
Jesus.
I knew I would have stayed. I could have stayed up and watched it. I wasn't getting tired whatsoever because I was so engrossed in what was going on. So I think that's when I know it's like, okay, it's pretty well paced. Like I'm actively engaged. The acting, I don't know who else was up for best actor in 2002, and this is not a knock on Brody's performance whatsoever, but it does surprise me to some degree that he did win best actor for this. I don't think that it was like,
Really?
yeah, I mean, it's very, I mean, it's the best performance that it was a great performance. I don't think there's anything wrong with the performance whatsoever. I would just like to see what else was up for best actor in 2002, because this is kind of a quiet film, and Spielman is kind of a quiet character throughout this. It is good in the sense that his acting has to take place behind the eyes, because a lot of what he says and does is thoughtful and calculated to a certain degree. He's a successful guy who's put in this terrible circumstance. I think Brody's performance was great. The surrounding cast we didn't get to spend a lot of time with, but I think everyone was good. Don't think that there was really a weak point in terms of the acting in this movie. With that being said, I'm going to give the acting a 9 out of 10.
Just to clarify, for best actor that year, so Adrian Brody won, and his competition was Nick Cage for Adaptation, Michael Caine in The Quiet American, Daniel Day-Lewis in Gangs of New York, and Jack Nicholson in About Schmidt, which
Yeah,
Daniel
I mean,
Day-Lewis in Gangs of New York is a top tier performance that I personally think is better than The Pianist. Sorry,
yeah, that's what I mean. You've got a
he's
lot of
such
good
an
actors.
iconic character as Billy the Butcher. But I do agree with you here. I also gave this a 9 out of 10. Like Adrian Brody kills it in this movie. He just portrays just confidence, but also just depression and sadness, and just like showing a will to survive in this movie that I feel like is unmatched. So props to Adrian Brody for giving us such an iconic performance and then doing it again in The Brutalist. If you haven't seen it yet, it's so good. For suspension of disbelief, I gave this an 8 out of 10. I did not know about that German officer and like him wanting to go and help out other Jews during World War II. So I was kind of taken aback when he was helping him out, kind of thinking like, but why? But I mean, I can go ahead and just say that it wasn't something that I was taken aback like the entire time I was watching. Again, there is a point that it does kind of take me out, but the rest of the movie, you're hooked.
Yeah, I mean, this is an especially tough category, um, because these are things that happened, right? So
Yeah.
it's not where I can sit here and look at the plot. And while there are things in which I'm like, wow, that's extremely lucky. For example, a German officer at one point choosing not to shoot Spielman, and just beating him instead, or him not being selected in a lineup where people are getting randomly shot, or the Russians missing when he's wearing a German coat at the very end of the movie, which is a great scene. There's a lot of instances in where if this weren't a true story, I'd probably knock it for a suspension of disbelief, which is crazy. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking the things I can knock it for are the sets. I thought that some of the sets looked like we were watching a movie at certain points. And I think some of the pacing and some of the liberties that may have been taken. I'm gonna also give it an 8. I really want to give it a 9. I'm gonna give it an 8, but I think that I would like to go back and see a really in-depth dive as to like what actually happened and what was a liberty taken by Polanski. Before we move on, do you want to just talk briefly again about Brody's performance in the scene where he meets the Nazi officer? Because I thought it was so impactful where he's at that point just like knowing this officer can shoot him at any point and he's just being honest with him essentially, like in the most average like survivor way possible. Just yeah, like I'm
He's
squatting
just
here.
like
Yeah,
essentially just giving himself up to
yeah,
this officer, and he's just like, "Yep, I'm here. Like I'm at your mercy. Like
right.
what do you want me to do?"
Yeah, crazy.
It is
For
crazy, dude.
originality, another tough one. I'm gonna give it a 9, I think here, and I don't really have much else to say. It just feels right at that spot. Obviously, this is a truly original, true story of someone's lived experience. So I don't have anything else to add in that category.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. I'm also going to give it a 9. I'd originally had it at an 8, but I feel like again, this is someone's real life story that we're dealing with here, and it's told in such a masterful way by Polanski that I think it would highly original. Obviously, like it's based on someone's life, so it's not like an original brainchild from Polanski, but I'll agree that it is quite an original take on the life and story of the Jews in World War II.
Polanski did not write the screenplay, though. By the way, um, I have who did write it, and while I'm pulling that up, I'm changing my score for suspension of disbelief. I'm gonna stick with my original score of a 9. It just feels better looking at it. What do you have for attachments? Attachment, Felix. Let's round this puppy out.
So for attachment, I gave it a 2. This is a movie where, again, it's not going to be something that I'm sticking with throughout my entire life, but I will respect it in the terms of like that this was a legendary movie that won a lot of accolades, and that's where I feel comfortable with it.
Wow, that's surprising though too. So that's below. I feel like we typically sit at a 3 for these movies, and that's where I'm gonna sit. So you're a little bit below your median for films, it seems, and that makes sense. It's like
Yeah.
so it's interesting. Yeah, I give it a 3, but I'm leaning more towards a 4. If I were to watch it again and feel the same way, I think that the score would go up. But yeah, man, I mean, an 84 to your 76, and I'd like to go back into the archives and see. It just typically lands with you having a slightly higher score than I do for movies. So I'd like to see what other
Somewhat,
movies
yeah.
it flipped
So it's tied with Wild Strawberries.
with an average score of 80 on the dot.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Which
think
I
our
think,
attachment for Wild Strawberries was higher, right? You gave it a 3 and I gave it a 3.
yes, I
Okay.
remember that. I think I even gave Wild Strawberries a 4, if I'm not mistaken, for attachment.
All right. So just outside the top 10 lands The Pianist. Wow.
That's
Crazy.
crazy. But yeah, just under the top 10 for us. But
Wow.
still, again, really good film, The Pianist. We're living our best lives with it here.
Yes.
But I'm
This is
glad that we
interesting.
watched it. This was a movie I wanted on my watch list for a long time. So I'm glad that I was able to finally get it up there and rank it.
I'm starting to wish that we had columns for our own individual rankings as well. Would be very interesting to see.
It's something that I could probably add in a little later.
But yeah, dude, we're in the thick of it now. That's why we're about to pull our 25th film.
We sure are. And there's only one way to do it, buddy.
Oh boy. Oh boy. This
We're
better
gonna-
be a special one. I have to say, Wheel, don't disappoint us here.
For real.
Of course,
Especially if
the
it's
way
going to
through.
be, if hopefully we get Colin in on the next episode,
Yeah,
then it's got to be
definitely.
something.
Before we spin, anything that you're hoping for, Felix, for this 25th anniversary?
For the 25th anniversary. Honestly, I'm like trying to think of like movies I haven't seen. I'm like looking through it here. Obviously, Dune Part 2 is always something I want to see, but in terms of movies I haven't seen yet, I really want to. It'd be really weird to pull Schindler's List after The Pianist.
Yeah, that would be.
I think there's no better time, dude. You ready to spin?
Let's do it. Let's do it. Give
Let's
us
do
something
it.
good.
All right, my guy, here we go.
I personally I would like to see Old Boy or The Thing.
Oh, old boy.
The
Well,
Human Condition.
too bad it's In
Oh
the
my
Mood for
gosh,
Love.
dude, we were dangerously close.
Oh my god.
We were dangerously close to The Human Condition, but
That was going to be nuts if we pulled it. But yes, so we have In the Mood for Love from 2000, which when we pulled this was at 54. So it's going to be cool to see what it is now on Letterboxd.
65. That's crazy.
Oh, it's at 65 now?
Yes, it is.
Well, cool. We have In the Mood for Love from 2000, directed by Wong Kar-wai. Feel the heat, keep the feeling burning, let the sensation explode. In 1962 Hong Kong, two neighbors form a strong bond after both suspect extramarital activities of their spouses.
Interesting.
Spicy.
All right,
But
this should be
yes,
a good
it's
one.
currently at 48,000 fans with a 4.4 average rating on Letterboxd and is sitting at 65 currently on the top 100 list.
I have a
But
lot of Letterboxd friends that have seen this film.
oh,
6,
really?
yes, and the lowest score is 4 stars. 1 4-star, 1 4.5, 4 5-stars.
Crazy. Well,
I'm
we'll
excited.
be the judge of that.
Mm-hmm.
But as always, Parker, this is exciting. I'm glad that we were able to jump on the horn. But as always, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Letterboxd at Parker_Paget. If you'd like to see what I'm watching outside of what the wheel is dictating, give me a follow on there. And other than that, don't try to find me. I'm nowhere, baby.
Nowhere. Well, you can also find me on Letterboxd at ETZIO911. I will be hopefully going to the movie soon. I don't know. I want to watch the new Captain America. We'll see how that goes, dude. But other than that, Parker, we will see you next time. This is the LetterBros podcast, and we will see you at the movies.